The Tale of Good Old Frank. I originally posted this to Tales from Retail, but this is definitely a better place for this story. I met Frank a couple years ago through mutual friends. We would all hang out at school between classes. Now, when I first met Frank, I thought he was a little odd because he was 35 and only hung out with my friends and I, who were all 18 years old. Well, as the years passed, we had multiple classes together and we became friends. He was a little off, but hey, that's just good old friendly Frank, right? Well, as luck would have it, I got a job with him where he was basically my boss. One day we were alone working, and I told him how happy I was that I'd just broken up with my horrible boyfriend of 3 years. I guess this was a mistake. Right then, he took off his wedding ring and put it in his pocket and gave me a wink. When I left that night, he gave me a hug that was a couple seconds too long and told me something like he would watch out for me now. The next day, there was a knock on my door. No one ever comes to my house and I live in the country, so I honestly was a little afraid to answer it. I opened the door, holding back my huge Rottweiler who was barking like a madman, and it is Frank. He knows where I live because he picked me up for work when my car broke down. He has flowers and chocolates and a toy race car. I quickly tell him thanks and shut the door. I still have no idea why he gave me the race car, so don't ask. Later, while I'm at job number 2, I get a text. Hey, I'm really happy that you're out of that relationship and we are working together. I know we have some sort of mutual feelings for each other for some time now, and I feel like now is our chance. Being around you makes me feel young again, and I want that feeling forever. I have separated from my wife so we can pursue our relationship. This is great. See you at work. What the fuck? I started shaking and felt a little sick to my stomach. I never gave him any reason to think that I liked him any more than a friend. In fact, the whole time I knew him, I was in a relationship. I stopped showing up to job number 1, and that is when the calls, texts, and emails came flooding in. I really need you at the job. Please come back. I'm sorry if I offended you. I thought you liked me. I divorced my wife for this. Please call back. I sent him one last email that clearly said he had completely creeped me out, and I wanted zero further contact with him. I did not want him to contact me in any way, shape, or form. I asked him to please just leave me alone. He still sent me a few more text messages, left a few more voicemails, and he actually still emails me every now and then. A week later, he comes into my job number 2 with yet another box of chocolates. I'm not sure if you got any of my texts, or voice messages, or emails, but you should really come back to the job. I already made this perfectly clear, Frank. Do not contact me. Please leave and I'm calling security. So he left, defeated. Fast forward a month and we had an event going on at work where the radio station came. If you donated $50, they would play a song of your choice on the radio for someone special. I was working away when I felt that horrible feeling like someone is watching me. I look up to see Frank just staring at me. Just then, I hear over the speakers from the radio station. This one goes out to me from an anonymous donor. It was Blue Christmas by Elvis. Here are the lyrics for anyone who doesn't know. I'll have a blue Christmas with you. I'll have a blue Christmas without you. I'll be so blue just thinking about you. Decorations of red on a green Christmas tree. Won't be the same, dear, if you're not here with me. I run into the back holding back tears and called security. They already knew the whole situation about Frank, so I just updated them, and they went and stood by him until he felt uncomfortable and left. Frank still likes to walk through my work every now and then, but security would do the same every single time. The last time I saw Frank, I was out to dinner with my dad, a former police officer who knows the whole Frank story. Somehow, Frank was seated at a table next to us, and I immediately made a face like, oh my god, look who it is. Frank notices me and smiles, then does a double take and looks at my dad. My dad is giving him the death stare. Frank's smile immediately turns into an oh shit face, and he bolted out the door without even getting a menu. You'll do it if you want to keep your job. Your boss can really make or break your job. Most of my Let's Not Meet stories are about residences I've had to deal with in the past. I've been perved on, verbally threatened, and even had a gun pointed at me once. Arguably, the creepiest situation I was ever in, however, was with my now former boss. To give a bit of background information, apartment complexes are frequently run by management companies. They decide the day-to-day decisions, including who works where, but they do not know the actual buildings or land. So it's pretty common for a complex to switch management companies. Since you work for the management company and not the owner, if your company gets fired, you're typically fired too. This is what more or less happened to me. One day I worked for Company A, and then the next day I went in and was told Company A was fired. We like you, so if you want to stay, you now work for Company B. It sucked, but it was better than being outright fired. At Company B, my boss was a guy named John. John was an older guy, about in his 60s, with a very used car salesman vibe about him. He was always friendly and polite, but was noticeably fake. He would come in almost every day to observe and train us, always talking down to us like children. Part of his training was instructing us to lie to residences if it meant they'd sign a lease. Promise them anything they want if it means they sign the lease. As long as you don't put the promise in writing, we don't have to give them anything. He called us all sweetheart, and almost every day, he'd ask all of us women out at lunchtime for drinks. It was the same thing every day. He'd tell us we deserved a treat and would offer to take us out for drinks. We decline. He'd say lunch then. Again, we decline. Then he'd say we should go to dinner. Again, we'd say no, that we typically ate dinner with our boyfriends or husbands. It got to the point that we'd tell him A, it was a bad idea to be drinking in the middle of the workday, and B, that his constant asking was inappropriate. He'd just laugh and say, I was joking, it was just a joke. These jokes continued. One day, John asked to meet with me to discuss our reports. This wasn't that unusual. He came in every day to talk about the reports. What was a bit strange was that he specifically scheduled a meeting, and at a time I would be working alone. When he showed up, he closed the office door and sat next to me at the desk. He didn't ask about the reports. Instead, making weird small talk with me, he asked about my family and suggested my father sounded like an alcoholic. No idea where he got that from, and suggested I might have daddy issues. He then told me about his own alcohol issues and referred to himself as a recovered alcoholic, something I found very strange, considering he constantly wanted to take us out for drinks. He then asked what I do in my free time. I told him art and writing. Oh, that's cool. I love writing. What kind of stories do you write? It's kind of weird. It's mostly fan fiction, based off of comics. Oh, you should bring it in tomorrow so I can read it! No, I don't think so. The only person I let read my fan fiction is my cousin. I'm not comfortable sharing it with anyone else. You'll bring it in if you don't want to get fired. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say in response to that. He continued. You know, you and I have a lot in common. We're alike. And that's what I like you. Not like Sarah. Sarah was one of my coworkers at the time. She was extremely fit and worked out for fun. She works out too much. Her body's too muscular and tight. It just really doesn't fit with our company culture. Sarah is one of our best employees. Yeah, she works out a lot, but that's what she likes to do with her free time. Well, we're firing her. And you better not tell her, unless you want to get fired too. From this, he segued into the actual purpose of the meeting, the reports. He bent over my shoulder to look at the papers while I explained to him that not much had changed since the day before. The apartments were getting rented, and we were on schedule. Good, that's very good, he said. He began to stroke the bare skin of my shoulder. You're a good girl, good girl. I thought my skin was going to rot and fall off. I just couldn't believe he'd actually touched me like that. After he left, I texted my coworkers, warning them of the touch, but afraid to tell them what he'd said. I also called my boss from my old company, Company A, begging she rehire us at one of the complexes they still managed. Thankfully, she did. I wish I could say this was my last dealing with John. Unfortunately, the same situation repeated itself at another complex I was working at about a year later. I came in one day to the news. Company B is the new management company. They like to keep you on. Again, I was faced with the reality that John was my boss. This time, John wasn't nearly as hands-on. He only came in 3 times before Company B got fired. The first time was on my first day with Company B. He came in to do our hire paperwork with someone from HR. He tried to deny knowing me, making a point to say, "Oh no, I've never met this woman before in my life. I would definitely remember if I've ever worked with her." He then slipped up later in the conversation, revealing something he would only know about me if he in fact already knew me. The second time was on a day that a new leasing agent was hired. He came in for her training, which was just her sitting and reading the employee handbook while we awkwardly sat in silence, then just barely above a whisper in a mocking voice, "T thought she could get away from me. She was wrong." The last time was when he snuck up on me in the model. I turned around and there he was. I was painfully aware of how trapped I was as he backed me into a corner. Thankfully, the maintenance man, aware of my issues with John, saw him follow me into the model and happened to walk in before I could do anything. As I previously mentioned, Company B got fired, so John was gone after that. I still have to see him sometimes at regional events, like trading and trade shows. I'm lucky nothing too serious ever happened, but as time goes on, the worse I feel about it. I was so miserable at the time, and constantly afraid I was going to get fired if I didn't just do what he said. It just sucks. Someone I love to never meet, but I have to see multiple times a week. I'm a 17-year-old female. I've been working at a pizzeria for a bit over 5 months now, and I have a love-hate relationship with it. My boss is sometimes amazing and sometimes a douche, overall cool. My coworker are people I can easily deal with, except one of the much older ones. He's actually the oldest and kind of a manager, probably reaching in his 50s. He delivers pizzas as well sometimes, and sometimes answers phones when it's too busy, which can be a big help. None of the other drivers do that. But he is a manager, I guess. But I could deal without it if he were ever to be fired. His name is Harold, and Reddit, Harold is a pervert. I work with him at least 3 times a week, and it makes me want to shred my skin, and sometimes his. I feel so uncomfortable around him. Everyone who works with me knows how little I think about him, though they'd feel it too. It's noticeably worse for me, though. He treats me as if I'm less of a person, and has joked about me being jailbait because I'm not 18. My overwhelming amount of dismay for him began when my boss started having him work for us more, opposed to one of the other shops he owns. Harold would always refer to me as young lady. Although it always bothered me, I ignored it because I didn't see it as that big of a deal, until I finally asked him to stop calling me that. I explained to Harold that my aunt would call me that when I was in trouble, so I didn't like it. He proceeded to ask me what he should call me, with an ugly, snide voice. I say ugly because when I think of him saying it, I hear it so vividly, and it only disgusts me, so I tell him to call me by my name. Instead of easily following through with my wishes, he starts calling me Miss Minor, Miss 17-year-old, young woman, and Miss Thing. As you can see, he's not only uncreative, but I can see that this is sexualizing me in a way. Besides me, there is only one other 17-year-old, and we're the youngest working. Except the other is a boy, a delivery driver, so of course he isn't Mr. 17 years old. His age is rarely brought up, though mine is now my name to this guy. Okay, if that was all, maybe I would understand if anyone is thinking I'm overreacting. However, this man constantly hangs on another female coworker, and she constantly tells him to back off. He slaps her butt and bites her ear. That's not something our customers want to see. Some days the woman Tina will just laugh a bit, but she has told him before to stop. She complains to me about it, but it's not made a big deal. Harold makes jokes that insinuate that once I turn 18, I'm free for him to do and say whatever he wants. He'll look at me in a kind of dominant way, as if I am his next meal. Our boss, Lewis, is not blind to anything. In fact, Harold's ringtone on Lewis's phone is a provocative song mocking how he is. My boss and I are close in a way, and we have discussed how disgusted I am with Harold. He always explains to me that Harold is older. He relies on this job and is my manager. Another older driver has even told me that Harold has joked about the day I turn 18, which is about 4 months away. He didn't tell me exactly, which is fine because I don't want to know. But he did say it was inappropriate, to say the least. I'm a very appreciated worker in the company, as is Harold due to his seniority and time working there, I guess. So I believe we'll both still have our jobs in 4 months. Although Lewis does get very fed up with him for many noticeable reasons, nothing much is done about him. I'm not one to shy away that I'm saying how I feel. I'm only 5'1" and not too scary, so I don't cause unneeded trouble, but I am told I can be a little fierce. I have outright told Harold many things. Only call me by my name. Stay outside or in the back. Don't talk to me unless it's work related. Fuck off. Yes, that all looks a bit harsh, I guess, but it's easy to say. If you knew him, you'd fucking understand. I did try to be patient at first, but I am openly a feminist, and I don't care how much older you are than me. If you do not respect me, I will not respect you, especially when I feel degraded by a crusty old perv. So, I speak my mind to this guy, and my boss does not stop me, but he doesn't really do much to help me. Once in a while, he'll tell him to go to the back or go do something else. I don't really care anyways, but I need help. How can I handle this on my own? I like to be able to do it on my own, but any advice is helpful also. If this is a wrong thread, or the wrong thread to post this on, please direct me to a better one. Thank you. Creepy mentor. Hey, usual long-time lurker and first-time poster. Now, I'm quite lucky that I've only been creeped on twice that I can actually remember. This happened a few months ago. I'm a student nurse, and as part of the course we do placements. And as part of these placements we have mentors, kind of supervisors that monitor our practice, etc. I'd also like to mention that I'm female and 20 years old, and quite naive when it comes to noticing people flirting with me. It would be more of a time saver if a dude whacked me over the head and dragged me back to his man cave. So, at the beginning of this placement, I find out my mentor is a male 50 years old, which is no biggie. I've been told that I have a talent of being able to get on with anyone. As it turns out, he knows 3 members of my family, because they trained together back in the day. I don't know if he thought that this gave some kind of different type of relationship between us than the usual student-mentor relationships, but in my mind, it didn't. It all started out with a wee comments about my personal life, ones that I didn't really mind answering. For example, where I live, how old I am, what year of study I'm in, that kind of thing. The first week went like that. I didn't feel too uncomfortable around him, although I kept seeing him looking at me out of the corner of my eye, just staring at me. Again, naive little me thought he was daydreaming or something like that and didn't think a thing about it. By the second week, he had escalated to touching my arm or pulling my hair, kind of like a kid in primary school does. He then goes on to try and hug me on a few occasions. I should also mention, I have personal space issues, and this guy was getting up in my grill, and it was beginning to make me feel very, very uncomfortable. After consulting with my godmother, a person who had known him previously, she told me to tell him straight up, so that's what I did. During a space between patients, I said, look, I have personal space issues. I really don't like people touching me unless I know it's coming, so if you could lay off the touching and hair pulling, that would be great. Simple and to the point. I thought this would stop the behavior and let me get on with my job. No, not even close. After I finished my speech, the first thing this ass monkey asked me is, if you don't like people touching you, how do you get down and dirty? Cue in the mouth vomit. I basically said it wasn't his fucking business, and started getting the room prepped for the next patient. Fast forward a couple weeks of small touches and 2 long glances in my direction of my boobs, or having conversations laced with inappropriate questions directed at my chest, it escalates again. Now, I can't tell you the verbatim comment because it involves patient's information, but it was basically if the patient's girlfriend didn't like to talk in the morning, she could use her mouth for other things, complete with the waggling eyebrows and sleazy smirk. Cue the second bout of vomit in mouth. When I got home, I was in an absolute mess. I kept thinking that I was doing something to bring this behavior on, although logically I knew I hadn't done anything, and it was all him, but I still felt terrible. After crying and swearing I was leaving the entire course, my mom convinced me to either suck it up and tell him off or go to management. The next day I avoided him like the plague. One of the other students noticed that I was not myself, being quiet and tearful. She asked what was wrong, and I basically poured 4 weeks of hell out on the poor girl. She took me to management, and they gave him a verbal warning and gave me a new mentor. Luckily, it was a Friday, and they let me home early that day. The rest of my time went almost without a hitch. I still caught him staring at me over the office dividers. One time in my last week, he cornered me in the staff kitchen and tried to apologize to me while staring at my chest. I know the fuck out of there, stammering an excuse that I cannot remember. So, creepy mentor dude. Let's not mate. Impressionable 18-year-old with a creepy supervisor. Not long after I turned 18 years old, I landed a job at a temp agency at a semiconductor plant. My job was to prep the semiconductors for tin plating by placing them on racks that could generate an electric current. I was pretty proud that I had a night shift gig working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., even though my folks were against it. This was in 1993, when minimum wage was a whopping $4.25 per hour. I was banking $5.50 an hour, working about 60 hours a week, which equated to about $300 a week after taxes. I worked side by side with a Filipino guy named Paul, who was really grouchy and pretty much called me out anytime I fucked up. He let me know on many occasions that I was just a kid working in a man's job, and that I shouldn't even be there. One night, Paul was in an especially foul mood and lit me up for not wearing my face shield. There were acid vats all over the room we worked in. Our shift supervisor, David, happened to be walking by just as I was getting chewed out by Paul. He seemed like a nice enough guy whenever we were interacted, which wasn't often up until that point. He walks up and asks Paul what the issue is, and my coworker proceeds to go off about the fact that I was working without a shield. He tells Paul to calm down and asks me to come to the office. At that point, I was pretty sure I was about to be canned. I was really nervous as we walked out the room and down the corridor to his office. And when we got there, he told me that I could hang out with him for the rest of the night. I apologized over and over again, but he just waved me off and said that Paul had a perpetual stick up his ass. He wound up tasking me with some filing, that he showed me how he did his paperwork and his QA, quality assurance tests on the finished batches. The night went by pretty quick after that, and I went home feeling pretty good. The next night, David tells me that I'll be working with him again. I jump at the chance to hang out in his office, and we have a pretty good time. He told me that I reminded him of his son, who was my age. I thought he looked a bit young to have an 18-year-old, but why would he lie? After that, we talked about Credence Clearwater Revival. There was a CD set being advertised on TV for $19.95 at the time that I really wanted, and he told me how much he loved that group. He told me he had been to some of their concerts and offered to let me borrow his Credence Hot Stuff tape until I got paid and could afford to order the set. When my shift ended, Paul cornered me in the bathroom when we were alone and gave me pretty stern warning about David. He said to watch myself around him because David liked young boys who he could groom. I reminded Paul that I was a man, not a boy, and he laughed in my face. I felt really shaken up and considered telling David about what Paul said. Then I felt embarrassed for some reason and didn't go through with it. I worked with David in his office for the rest of the week. I remember thinking to myself how cool it was to be working with a boss. On the last night of our work week, David asked me to stay in his office during my lunch break because he had something he wanted to talk to me about. I was a little nervous that my assignment was ending because there had been a round of layoffs in the company. Instead, he told me that he was considering making me his assistant and that I would be hired on as a permanent very soon. I couldn't believe my luck and thanked him over and over again. He just smiled and said, "It's my pleasure, little buddy." It struck me as a little odd that he would call me that, but I blew it off because I figured he was older and maybe it was just something he said to his own kid. On Sunday nights, I came in for work and Paul cornered me again, telling me to be watchful. I tried to be as respectful as I could, but I was honestly shaken up. When I reported to David's office, he noticed something was off and asked me about it. I lied and told him I was under some stress and that it was nothing I couldn't handle. He got really upset and asked if someone at work was giving me trouble, but I calmed him down and told him there wasn't an issue at work. He then gets up and looks through the glass half of his door while I started measuring the thickness of the newest batch. Out of nowhere, he comes up from behind and starts massaging my shoulders. I get an uncomfortable feeling right away, but then he stops and pats my shoulder in an almost fatherly fashion and moves on. He and I engage in our usual conversation, but nothing seems out of the ordinary until lunchtime, when he asked me to stay and talk to him again. I immediately assumed it was about making me his new assistant, and I agreed to stay and talk. Once again, he tells me what a great future I have with the company and how I can work with him every night. I'm thinking about how proud my folks are going to be and how I'm going to spend my raise money, so I decide to impress him by continuing to work while we talk about my promotion. While I'm bending over to look through a microscope for nodules on the semiconductors, I feel him run his hands all over my ass and immediately stand straight up. He then proceeds to say in the creepiest voice ever, "You've got a nice plump boy butt. I really like to get up into that." At this point, I'm totally confused and scared. This guy is easily 100 pounds heavier and a whole lot stronger than I was, and he was essentially blocking my path out of the office. I asked him to please let me leave, and he just smiles while he's shaking his head no while he keeps talking to me. "You keep showing that ass of yours off like it's some sort of trophy. Please let me go. Come on, baby cakes. Let daddy have some of that plum." "I'm not gay." "Sure you are, honey. Let me leave or I'm calling the cops." "You won't be calling them from this phone." At that exact moment, he reaches over and disconnects the cord from the wall while I tremble in fear. I had no idea what to do, so I just made a break for the door. He grabs my arm and digs in with his fingers. Then he yanks me into the chair and tells me that he'll hurt me if I say a word to anyone. I felt like such a pussy for this, but I burst into tears and promised him I wouldn't say anything if he would just let me leave. Before he let me go, he told me that my mom and dad would be ashamed of me for acting like a girl, and that I had been teasing him with my ass ever since my assignment began. He told me, "Boys like you don't leave a party without getting fucked in the ass." I ran out of the office in tears, right past Paul, who looked alarmed and followed me to the restroom to make sure I was okay. David saw him walking after me and came into the bathroom with us. He pretty much ordered Paul back to his workstation and told me to leave immediately. I washed my face and walked out the door, trying my hardest to keep it together until I got to my car. When I got home, I went to my room without waking my folks and cried in bed until the sun came up. Then I called the temp agency and quit. It's okay, baby. We'll be home soon. Sorry for the throwaway. Also, I'm not a writer, so sorry if this is a mess. When I started working for my first out of high school big girl job, I was a second shift temp in a stockroom. A lot of employees coming and going through the area, roughly until all but the on-site supervisor left. This shift would rotate between the supervisors and was not always the same person, usually around 4. There was one guy in particular, Tom, who would walk through and stop and talk occasionally around the time I got there, and start lingering longer and longer the later in the day it got. He gave me a bit of a weird vibe, but I had chalked up to him being socially awkward. After a couple weeks, he was spending almost an hour in the stockroom, talking to me and following me around while I worked. Being that I was new and still a temp, just keeping my fingers crossed the job would turn to full-time, I didn't want to offend him by telling him to go away and risk jeopardizing my job. So I let him mostly talk at me about his job, his hobbies, the weather, while I just nodded and and continued to work. He came in with a camera on more than one occasion to take pictures of the material of our company's websites, and one day asked to take my photo for the company yearbook, snapped a couple shots of me and a few other people in the area and left. He started coming into the stockroom after my supervisor, Sam, had left for the day, and he'd be standing closer to me, leaning against the forklift so I couldn't get my job done, suddenly needing to photograph the material I happened to be pulling, sitting at my desk playing on his phone. He started slipping in comments about how pretty he thought I was, finding excuses and ways to touch me, picking something off my shirt or nudging me as he walked next to me, and more than once mentioned he didn't live far from work, just on the other side of the woods behind the building, if I wanted to hang out sometime, all of which I turned down and tried to deflect or ignore as much as possible. I came back to my desk one day, and he was leaning against the wall next to it. I was having kind of a pissy day, and wasn't really in the mood to deal with people. So I finally asked him, "Seriously, Tom, why are you back here all the time?" He laughed and said, "It's really relaxing back here. I could sit here and watch you drive around on that thing for hours. Not all girls could look that pretty while driving such a big piece of machinery." I told him that he was making me uncomfortable with his comments, about my appearance especially, and asked me that he leave me alone. Though he looked incredibly pissed, he surprisingly obliged and left. He didn't talk to me for a while after that, but he was still constantly hanging out in the stockroom. I'd be pulling material and come around a corner to find him standing in the middle of the aisle. I'd come out of the bathroom and he'd be standing feet away, getting a drink from the fountain. He would sit at my desk and bullshit with my boss and some of my coworkers until they left for the day. Every time I looked up, his eyes were locked onto me. You get the point, he was everywhere. The vibe had gone from weird to creepy, and I started feeling like I was being watched all the time. Eager to get out of the stockroom, I started applying for every open position in the factory, including the receptionist position. After interviewing with HR, they offered me the job, but asked that I finish out unofficial 2 weeks notice in the stockroom before they moved me to the front desk. On my last week, while pulling boxes for a job, a large roll of film fell off the stack, knocking me onto the cement floor. I cracked my head on the ground, and the film crashed down onto my foot. Immediately, people came flying to help me, including Tom. He told my coworker to get my supervisor, and they took off as he kneeled down next to me and pulled my sneaker and sock off to see my foot. My head was throbbing, and I barely noticed when he said it was going to be okay, but that he needed to get me to the hospital in case I'd broken something. He scooped me up off the floor and started carrying me down the hall towards the back door of the building, the doorway from the parking lot. It kind of hit me all at once that he was carrying me, and not in the right direction. I asked him where we were going, and he murmured, "It's okay, baby. We'll be home soon." I fucking freaked. I started yelling, asking him what the fuck he was doing, and telling him to put me down, yelling for help and fighting to get down. Tom dropped me and started asking me what the hell my problem was. I looked up and saw the on-site supervisor, Matt, and my coworker standing in the doorway a few feet away, looking confused. I burst into tears, and Tom started babbling, telling Matt that he had told me I need to stay there until the supervisor showed up, but that I had insisted he help me up and walk me to the office. He finished by saying, "Unless you got knocked on the head really badly, because we were about halfway here," and she just started screaming at me. By now, there were a lot of people in the hallway, and I was still crying, partially due to my injuries and being dropped, and partially because I was so embarrassed about the whole situation. Matt called a plant manager to let him know he was bringing me to the hospital, then helped me to his car. On the ride to the hospital, I told Matt everything that had transpired over the last couple months, and how uncomfortable and creeped out Tom had been making me feel, ending by telling him what he had said as he was carrying me down the hall. Matt said that Tom could be a little awkward, but he meant well, and that he was sure that Tom hadn't had any bad intentions, and that I must have misunderstood what he'd said to me. He instead started asking me more about the amount of time Tom was spending in the stockroom. After a long hospital visit, I was diagnosed with a concussion and a broken foot, and fitted with a boot. Since I only had a few days left in the stockroom, and wouldn't be much help anyways, I was given a note excusing me from work with permission to resume on Monday, given that I would be spending most of my time sitting at a desk. 2 days later, I got a phone call from Sam, letting me know that they had looked into my predicament and that it wouldn't be an issue anymore. He let me know that Matt had dropped off my excused absence note with HR, told me to have a good weekend, that he'd see me Monday. I started work at the front desk the following week, being trained in by a woman named Diana. During a lull between phone calls, she mentioned something about Tom getting fired the previous week. Shocked, I asked her why they fired him, and she said that they had apparently done a little digging and figured out that he hadn't done any actual work in months, and decided to let him go. After letting him know he was fired, he had to be escorted from the building, screaming obscenities at everyone he passed, threatening to beat the shit out of his escort the whole way. After the behavior on the way out, they'd asked that he not come back to the building. I had literally never been more relieved in my life. I asked if they had someone in mind to take his place, and they made a joke about asking if they could retake my yearbook picture, because my last one was from the stockroom days. My mood instantly plummeted when Diana looked at me like I was stupid and asked me what I was talking about. We weren't doing any company yearbook. Diana finished the week out, and on Monday I was flying solo. It was pretty uneventful, and I was thrilled to have such an easy job. That Thursday morning, I was in the file room behind my desk when I heard someone say, "Hello." I dusted myself off and hobbled into the lobby, with the man in the lobby's back turned to me. I slipped into my chair and asked, "How can I help you?" You know how in movies and books, when they say their blood ran cold, there is no other feeling to describe how I felt when he turned around and I realized it was Tom. My heart fell into my stomach. My whole body went numb, and any thoughts going through my brain were replaced by terrified static. His eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles under them. his hair uncombed and greasy enough to make his brown hair look almost black. And the smell coming off of him was bad enough that I couldn't smell much else, even from across the desk. He looked, for lack of a better term, deranged and homeless. He stared at me for a minute before finally croaking out, "Hey, I need you to give this to someone. I borrowed it from Ed, and I need to get it back to him. I need you to hold on to it and give it back to him. You have to hold on to it and don't lose it. It's really important you give it to him." Ed, our maintenance guy, was out on LOA for 2 weeks. I watched as Tom took a plastic black box, like this out of the large leather jacket he had on, and set it on the desk between us. "Is that a bomb?" I managed to squeak out. I had no idea what it was, and to be honest, it looked scary as shit. Tom shook his head, his blank expression unchanged as he said, "No, it's not. If I want everyone here dead, you would know. You will be the first to know." I jolted across the desk to grab the phone, but Tom was faster. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me towards him, digging his fingernails into my skin, and squeezing so hard I thought my wrist was going to break. With his other hand, he pulled a knife out of his pocket and pressed the blade into my lower lip, like he was shushing me with it. With his face inches from mine, he shouted, "I love you, I love you, I love you. Stop acting like you're such a bitch." I closed my eyes and screamed. He let me go and sent me crashing to the floor, and I kept screaming until the people in the office upstairs and from the break room had come running. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of ER doctors to stitch my lip up and police questioning. After a couple hours, the police brought me in 2 items sealed in plastic bags. One was the sneaker I had been wearing when the accident had happened in the stockroom. The other was a pink sweatshirt I recognized that had gone missing from my locker around the time I started the job. I was told they had gone to his house to arrest him, and instead found him dead, with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. They found dozens of photos of me taped up in every room of his house. The fake yearbook photo he'd taken, the pictures of me in the stockroom, of me getting into my car, smoking behind the building, walking through the halls at work. The box he was dropping off? It was a trail camera. Apparently, hunters used them to take photos of their property or hunting trails. It was later confirmed that it wasn't Ed's, although he did say he had talked to Tom about one that he had at some point in time. I don't know if he planned on getting it back from Ed or waiting and retrieving it himself. I don't want to know. I don't know what his long-term plans were, if he even had any. I don't know why he picked me. I quit my job, moved back in with my mom. I worked from home in her house. I spent a really long time feeling guilty about his suicide, so much that it drove me to try to take my own life. I spent countless hours in therapy trying to deal with the trauma and nightmares and the constant fear and anxiety, even after having it confirmed to me countless times that he is indeed dead. I still live in fear that he's going to show up